The autumn rain pelted against the windows of Gallery 23, where Olivia Parker stood before her latest painting, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The piece, a swirling abstract of blues and grays that had consumed 3 months of her life, looked woefully out of place among the polished contemporary works surrounding it. This was her first showing at a prestigious Manhattan gallery, and already she felt like an imposter. "Interesting use of technique," a deep voice commented behind her. "The turbulence in the brushstroke suggests internal conflict, yet there's an underlying sense of hope in the lighter tones breaking through." Olivia turned to find a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit studying her painting with genuine interest. James Richardson, she recognized him immediately from business magazines, the youngest CEO in New York's financial district and notorious for his brutal corporate takeovers. "Most people just say it looks like a storm," she replied, trying to mask her surprise at his presence. He smiled, revealing unexpected warmth in his otherwise stern features. "I've always believed that real art speaks to something deeper than the obvious." Their eyes met briefly, and Olivia felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. Here was a man who could probably buy the entire gallery without blinking, yet he spoke about her work with surprising insight. "The artist sees the world differently," James continued, still studying the painting. "They capture truths others miss." He turned to her fully then, his dark eyes intent. "Would you join me for coffee? I'd love to hear more about your perspective." Olivia hesitated. Everything about him represented the corporate world she'd rejected, the ruthless pursuit of profit, the sacrifice of creativity for commerce. Yet something in his genuine appreciation for her art made her curious. "I should warn you," she said, "I have strong opinions about the commercialization of art." His smile widened. "Good. I have strong opinions about everything." Makes for better conversation. As they walked to a nearby cafe, neither could have predicted how this chance encounter would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. James, accustomed to navigating billion-dollar deals, found himself intrigued by someone who measured wealth in experiences rather than dollars. Olivia, who had always seen the corporate world as soulless, discovered complexity in a man society had labeled a corporate raider. The rain continued to fall outside the cafe windows as they talked, losing track of time. Their worlds, seemingly so far apart, began to overlap in unexpected ways. Yet even as they found common ground in their appreciation for art and authentic expression, the fundamental differences in their lives cast long shadows over their growing connection. For now, though, they were just two people sharing coffee and conversation, while outside, the city moved in its eternal rhythm, indifferent to the small moments that sometimes change lives forever. Colliding worlds. The next few weeks brought a series of encounters that felt both inevitable and impossible. James found himself making excuses to visit smaller galleries, while Olivia caught herself reading financial news for the first time in her life. Their coffee meetings became longer, more frequent, and increasingly personal. "You really lived in a converted warehouse for 2 years?" James asked one evening, as they walked through Central Park. The setting sun painted the sky in colors that reminded Olivia of her latest canvas. "Best years of my life," she smiled, remembering. "No heat, questionable plumbing, but so much creative energy. We had musicians, sculptors, photographers, all of us just trying to make something meaningful." James shook his head, but his eyes were warm. "I spent those same years working 18-hour days, living on coffee and spreadsheets." "And now you're the youngest CEO in the financial district," Olivia noted. "Was it worth it?" The question hung between them, heavier than she'd intended. James was quiet for a moment, watching a group of children flying kites in the distance. "I used to think so," he said finally. "Now, I'm not so sure about anything anymore." Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed. James's board members whispered about his distraction during meetings, his sudden interest in the arts raising eyebrows in corporate circles. Meanwhile, Olivia's fellow artists watched with mixed concern and curiosity as she began showing up to studio sessions in designer clothes, gifts from James she'd initially resisted but eventually accepted. The tension came to a head at a charity gala where their worlds collided spectacularly. James had invited Olivia as his date, hoping to share his world with her. She'd agreed, wanting to understand his life better, but the evening proved challenging from the start. "James, darling." An elegant woman in her 50s approached them, eyes sharp behind her designer glasses. "I didn't expect to see you with." She paused, examining Olivia with barely concealed disdain, "company." "Victoria," James nodded coolly. "This is Olivia Parker, a talented artist whose work you might have seen at Gallery 23. "Oh, how interesting," Victoria smiled thinly. "James, dear, the board members were hoping to discuss the Shanghai merger. Perhaps your friend would understand if we borrowed you." Before James could respond, another voice cut in. "Parker. The one who turned down the Hartley Foundation grant because it was too commercial." Olivia recognized Charles Whitman, a prominent art critic known for his scathing reviews. His presence at a corporate event surprised her, until she remembered his family's banking connections. "I believe art should speak truth, not chase trends," she replied evenly, feeling James tense beside her. "And how does one pay bills with truth?" Charles smirked. "Or perhaps that's less of a concern now." His eyes flicked meaningfully between her and James. The insinuation hung in the air like poison. Olivia felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, James stepped forward, his expression dangerous. "Mr. Whitman," his voice was quiet but carried an edge that made the critic step back instinctively. "I suggest you rethink your implications." The confrontation drew attention. Whispers spread through the crowd, and Olivia could feel the weight of judgmental stares. This was James's world, where every gesture was analyzed, every relationship calculated for advantage or weakness. Later that night, as they stood on her small apartment's fire escape, the city lights twinkling below, the evening's tensions finally spilled over. "I don't belong in your world, James," Olivia said softly. "And you don't belong in mine. We've been fooling ourselves thinking this could work." "Why?" James challenged. "Because some small-minded people can't understand us." "Since when do you care about others' opinions?" "It's not about opinions." Olivia turned to face him, frustrated. "It's about fundamental differences. You live in a world where everything has a price tag. I believe some things should remain priceless. You think that's all I am? A man who only sees dollar signs." The hurt in his voice was raw. "Maybe you're not as free of prejudice as you think." They stood in silence, the city's distant hum filling the space between them. Both realized they'd reached a crossroads, but neither knew how to bridge the growing divide. Their worlds, which had seemed to be merging so beautifully, now felt further apart than ever. As James left that night, both wondered if their differences were truly insurmountable, or if they were letting others' expectations destroy something precious. The answer would require both of them to question everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. Breaking point. The following weeks brought a series of events that would test both Olivia and James in ways neither had expected. A major international art dealer had seen Olivia's work at Gallery 23 and offered her a year-long residency in Paris. Meanwhile, James faced mounting pressure from his board as a hostile takeover threatened to destroy everything he'd built. Paris. James stood in Olivia's studio, surrounded by her latest series, massive canvases exploring themes of connection and separation. That's incredible." His voice carried a weight she'd never heard before. "It's a chance to study with some of the best artists in Europe," Olivia explained, trying to contain her excitement as she saw the conflict in his eyes. "They want me to lead their contemporary program. It's everything I've dreamed of." James moved closer to one of her paintings, his fingers hovering near but not touching the surface. The piece showed two figures, their forms barely distinguishable in a storm of color and motion. "When would you leave?" 3 weeks. The words fell between them like stones in still water. He turned sharply. 3 weeks. And you're just telling me now? I just found out yesterday, Olivia defended. I haven't even decided if I'm going. Of course you're going, James said firmly, though his eyes betrayed his pain. This is your dream. You can't turn it down. But there was more he wasn't saying. The hostile takeover bid had left him working around the clock, fighting to save not just his company but the jobs of thousands of employees. He needed support, stability, someone to come home to, not a partner on another continent. What about us? Olivia asked softly. James ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty from someone usually so composed. I don't know. I can't leave New York right now. The company, there's too much at stake. There's always too much at stake, Olivia said, an edge creeping into her voice. Another deal, another crisis, another merger. When does it end? That's not fair, James replied, his own frustration rising. You know what I'm dealing with. This isn't just about money, people's livelihoods depend on me. And my work doesn't matter. My dreams don't count because they don't have a dollar value attached. I never said that. James's voice rose. I'm telling you to go, aren't I? To follow your dreams. Even though it means. He didn't finish the sentence, but Olivia heard the unspoken words, even though it means losing you. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, a fitting soundtrack to the moment their carefully built connection began to crack. Maybe this is for the best, Olivia finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we've been avoiding the truth, that we want different things, live in different worlds. Is that what you really believe? James asked, his voice rough with emotion. That everything we've shared means nothing because we come from different backgrounds? No, Olivia touched his arm gently. It means everything. That's why it hurts so much. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations and painful silences. James threw himself into fighting the takeover, his days becoming an endless series of meetings and strategic planning sessions. Olivia began organizing her studio, applying for her visa, making arrangements for her absence. They tried to make time for each other, but each meeting was tinged with the knowledge of their approaching separation. Every touch, every conversation carried the weight of what they were about to lose. The night before Olivia's departure, James came to her studio one last time. He found her surrounded by packed boxes, her paintings carefully wrapped for storage. The space that had been so alive with color and creativity now felt hollow. I wanted to say goodbye properly, he said, holding out a small package. And to give you this. Olivia opened it to find a beautiful antique compass, its brass case worn smooth with age. To help you find your way, James explained softly. And maybe, someday, to help you find your way back. Olivia's vision blurred with tears as she traced the compass's delicate engravings. James, But what could she say? That she loved him but needed to follow her dream? That she wished things were different? That she was sorry? Instead, she kissed him, trying to pour everything she couldn't say into that one gesture. When they finally parted, both knew it was really goodbye. The next morning, as her plane took off from JFK, Olivia clutched the compass and watched New York disappear beneath the clouds. In his office downtown, James stood at his window, watching the same sky, both of them wondering if some distances were too great to bridge, no matter how strong the connection. Transformations. Paris in autumn was everything Olivia had dreamed of, and nothing like she'd imagined. The city's artistic energy was intoxicating, but she found herself viewing it through changed eyes. She saw beauty not just in the traditional galleries and museums, but in the sleek modern buildings of La Défense, where ambitious dreams took different shapes. Her work began to evolve. The stark divisions between commerce and creativity that had once dominated her thoughts began to blur. Her new series, bridges, explored the connections between seemingly opposing forces, tradition and innovation, structure and chaos, heart and mind. One evening, as she stood before her latest piece at the residency's gallery opening, a French art critic approached her. "Your work has such complexity now," he observed. "There is pain here, but also understanding. You have learned something profound, no?" Olivia touched the compass that still hung around her neck. "I learned that strength comes in many forms," she replied. "And that sometimes our prejudices blind us to the beauty in things we don't understand." Meanwhile, in New York, James was fighting the battle of his career. The hostile takeover had turned ugly, with his opponents trying to paint him as distracted and unfocused. But something had changed in him too. Instead of responding with his usual aggressive tactics, he found himself thinking differently. "We're not just fighting for market share," he told his board. "We're fighting for people, our employees, their families, their dreams. That's what gives our company its real value." Some board members shifted uncomfortably at this new language, but others leaned forward, intrigued. James continued, "I propose we establish an innovation fund. Let's invest in our people's creativity, their ideas. Turn our employees into partners." He thought of Olivia as he spoke, how she'd taught him to see beyond balance sheets to the human stories beneath. The takeover threat had forced him to recognize what truly mattered, not just profits, but purpose. As winter descended on both cities, each found themselves facing unexpected challenges. Olivia received an offer to extend her residency indefinitely, with the possibility of becoming the gallery's permanent director. It was an opportunity beyond anything she'd imagined. Yet as she walked the streets of Paris, she found herself studying the architecture of modern office buildings with the same appreciation she'd once reserved for centuries-old cathedrals. She began to see how creativity could thrive within structure, how passion could partner with precision. In New York, James surprised everyone by turning down a merger that would have guaranteed his company's safety but would have meant laying off hundreds of workers. Instead, he implemented his innovation program, transforming his corporate culture. "You're different," Victoria commented after a board meeting. "There's something balanced about you now. I wasn't sure about these changes at first, but I think I understand what you're trying to build." James smiled, remembering heated discussions with Olivia about the soul of business. "I learned that true strength isn't about dominating others," he said. "It's about creating space for everyone to grow." Late one night, unable to sleep, Olivia found herself in her Paris studio, surrounded by her new works. Each canvas told a story of transformation, of barriers breaking down, of understanding reached across divides. She picked up her phone and, before she could think too much about time zones, dialed a familiar number. In New York, James was just leaving his office when his phone rang. He stared at the screen for a long moment, his heart racing at the name he saw there. "Hello." His voice was soft, uncertain. "I understand now," Olivia said simply. There was no need to explain what she meant. In their months apart, they had each been on a journey of discovery, learning to see beyond their own perspectives, to understand that true strength often meant embracing what seemed opposite to your nature. "I understand too," James replied, looking out at the city lights. "I didn't before, but I do now." The silence that followed was different from their last goodbye, not heavy with endings, but alive with possibilities. They had needed this time apart to grow, to challenge their assumptions, to become people who could bridge the gap between their worlds. Reunion. Spring came early to New York that year. Gallery 23, where their story had begun, was hosting a special exhibition, Bridges Between Worlds, Olivia Parker's triumphant return to Manhattan after her transformative year in Paris. The gallery hummed with energy as critics, artists, and business leaders mingled, drawn by the buzz surrounding Olivia's new work. Her evolution as an artist was evident in every piece, paintings that married the raw emotion of her earlier style with a new understanding of structure and form, of how different elements could come together to create something greater than their parts. James stood before the centerpiece of the exhibition, a massive canvas that took up an entire wall. It showed two cities merging, one organic and flowing, the other structured and geometric. But instead of clashing, they flowed into each other, creating something new and beautiful at their intersection. He recognized the skylines, New York and Paris, but also something more, a visual representation of their journey. "The critics are calling it my best work yet," Olivia's voice came from behind him. "They say I've found my balance." James turned, his heart racing at the sight of her. She looked different, more confident, more centered, but with the same fire in her eyes that had first drawn him in. "It's incredible," he said softly. "You've managed to capture exactly what I've been trying to build at the company." Olivia smiled, noting his casual clothes, a far cry from the rigid suits he'd once worn like armor. "I heard about your innovation program. Creating spaces where creativity and commerce can thrive together. Pretty revolutionary for a corporate raider." "I had a good teacher," he replied, then hesitated. "Olivia, Mr. Richardson." Charles Whitman approached, his manner drastically different from their last encounter. "Your corporate transformation has been remarkable. And Ms. Parker, your new work is extraordinary. The way you've integrated classical elements with contemporary themes." "Thank you," Olivia cut in politely but firmly. "Would you excuse us? I need to discuss something with James." She led him away from the crowd, up to the gallery's rooftop garden. The city spread out before them, a tapestry of lights under the evening sky. Olivia pulled out the compass he'd given her, its brass case now worn smooth from countless moments of being held. "I used to think I had to choose," she said, watching the needle spin. "Between art and commerce, passion and practicality, my world and yours. But that was never really the choice, was it?" James shook his head. "The real choice was between fear and growth. Between holding on to our prejudices and opening ourselves to new possibilities." "Your company's doing well," Olivia noted. "I read about how you beat the takeover by transforming the corporate culture. Bringing art programs into office spaces, encouraging creative thinking. And you're being offered gallery directorships all over Europe," James replied. "Your work is changing how people think about the relationship between art and commerce." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city below. Finally, Olivia turned to him. "I'm staying in New York," she said. "I've been offered a position creating art programs for corporate spaces, helping companies understand the value of creativity in business. It's a way to bridge both worlds." James's heart leapt, but he kept his voice steady. "What about Paris? Your dreams?" "My dreams have evolved," she smiled, touching the compass. "Sometimes finding your way means discovering that the path isn't what you thought it would be." "And us?" James asked softly. "Have we found our way?" In answer, Olivia took his hand and placed the compass in it. The needle spun briefly before settling, pointing not north, but directly between them. "I think," she said, looking up at him with eyes that held both wisdom and hope, "we've finally learned how to build our own bridges." James pulled her close, and as they kissed, the city seemed to surge with energy around them, a symphony of art and commerce, dreams and reality, heart and mind coming together in perfect harmony. They had both traveled long roads to reach this point, learning that true strength lies not in rejecting what's different, but in finding ways to bring opposing forces into balance. Below them, the gallery buzzed with life, their two worlds mingling and merging just like the cities in Olivia's painting. They had found their way not by choosing one world over the other, but by creating something new together, a bridge between realms, a space where both their dreams could flourish. The compass lay between them, its needle steady now, pointing toward a future they would build together, where art and business, heart and mind, could coexist in beautiful harmony. They had discovered that love wasn't about erasing differences, but about celebrating them, about finding strength in contrast and beauty in the spaces between worlds. And in that moment, on a rooftop high above the city where their story began, they understood that some distances aren't meant to be bridged, they're meant to be transformed into foundations for something greater than either world could create alone.